Composition of a Killer fans. It's Dr. Cassidy. Glad you joined today. I'm going to be talking about Richard Chase. He's known as the vampire killer. And you can probably guess that it's because he liked to drink the blood of his victims. He's an interesting case. Before I dive into that, let me just say that many of the things that we talk about are not meant to be clinical diagnosis. This is really a focus on early childhood experiences and early childhood trauma, and looking for those signs in our youngest children that could develop into, of course, the most severe cases, which would be violent offenders, serial killers, all of those things that are in that category, if you will. All right, so Richard Trenton Chase was born in 1950, and of course he is dead, but he died in 1980. But he was an American serial killer. He was also a cannibal and a necrophiliac. That's unfortunately quite common in our most outrageous serial killers. They tend to be cannibals. They tend to be necrophiles, and they really don't want to talk much about that. So there's not a whole lot of information that we can glean from these people as to really what drives them to do that. We can make some educated guesses, which is what a lot of this is actually, but in this case, Richard was one of the most severe cases, I would think. In my opinion, he is definitely one of the most severe cases. His early life, by the age of 5, it's reported that he exhibited evidence of all 3 parts of the McDonald triad, which is, if you recall, a theory suggesting the development of violent psychopathy. In his adolescence, he was said to be a heavy drug user. We can surmise from that if he, in his adolescence, if he was a heavy drug user, he probably did not have a lot of supervision at home. He probably had some bad experiences that drove him to use drugs as a coping mechanism. But again, that information is somewhat limited. Reports on him say that he developed hypochondria as he matured, and he often complained that his heart would occasionally stop beating or that someone had stolen his pulmonary artery. He would hold oranges on his head, believing that vitamin C would be absorbed by his brain via diffusion. And he also believed that his cranial bones had become separated and were moving around, so he shaved his head to be able to watch this activity. You can probably surmise at this point that he had some significant mental issues. I'm sure he has multiple diagnoses. He's definitely schizophrenic. And I don't know that he was ever officially diagnosed with this. It may not have even been a diagnosis prior to 1980 when he died, but I do think that he has that social disorder, as we see very commonly in serial killers. So he spent a brief time in a psychiatric ward in 1973, and in 76, he was involuntarily committed to a mental institution where he was taken to a hospital after injecting rabbit's blood into his veins. And the staff nicknamed him Dracula because of his blood fixation. He broke the necks of 2 birds he caught through the institution window and drank their blood. He also extracted blood from therapy dogs with stolen syringes. I don't recall ever reading anything even remotely similar to this. Um, it's it goes beyond what we typically see in your average serial killer. It's horrible that I say it that way, but it is the truth. You something it goes back to this nature and nurture argument. I feel certain that we could strongly place Richard in the category of nature. I think he was born mentally disturbed. I think that he something is missing. Um, and I don't really have any background so far on like reports of his family, his parents, any of that kind of stuff. But I'm going to keep researching because I really feel like there's got to be something in there, and it may be a genetic abnormality. So keep that in mind as we discuss this. He was diagnosed, of course, at that time with paranoid schizophrenia. And then, after undergoing a battery of treatments involving psychotropic drugs, he was deemed no longer a danger to society, and later in 76 was released to his mother's custody. And I have a huge, tremendous issue with this. We've seen this in other cases where not necessarily the mental institutions or the mental um, system, but those who have gone to prison or gone to jail, and they go through these programs that they have inside the prisons, and then they're deemed to be recovered or quote unquote fixed, and they release them. You know, some of them get early release, some of them get released for good behavior, those type of things. And it's no surprise because we see a lot of serial killers go into like the military where it's very, very structured. They do not have the freedom to make their own choices on many, many things. And so they really thrive in that environment. And as soon as they come out, where they have very little um, supervision and they have very little structure, like they experienced in the military, we see them go off the deep end and commit the worst crimes. So that's not surprising to me. But in the same regard, he was in this mental institution, and after being put on this medication, was deemed to be no longer a danger to society. There's absolutely no guarantee that once he's released into the world without the supervision, that he's going to continue taking that medication. And that's what we typically see. You know, it's all well and good for those of us in the normal category, typically developing category. We know we have to take our medications. I know I have to take blood pressure medication. For me, it's genetic, and I have to take it so I don't forget. I mean, it's just part of my daily routine. These are people who do not have a routine. These are people who do not function like normal society. So when you release them on their own and you say, well, as long as he keeps taking that medication, he's no longer a threat to society. I'm sure there are statistics on it. I need to look that up as well. I mean, I'd like to know what is the likelihood that these patients, once released, continue to take their medication. I'm going to say that it's very low, and I'm going to say that the only exceptions to this would be families who bring that person home into their home and they are completely supervising their life, um, micromanaging it, if you will. So those are the ones that could possibly be fine in society after these breakdowns. And of course, you know that there's different levels of schizophrenia and there's different levels of violence. Um, he, of course, would be the one of those that's in the extreme category, but it still rings true. If he's going to be released into society, how do you guarantee that he's not going to do the things he did before. And we know, obviously, from this that he did he did actually go on a crime spree between the years of 77 and 78. When he was released into his mother's custody, she weaned him off of his medication and got him his own apartment. Here is a case of a family member actually helping or enabling someone who clearly needed that medication to function normally, enabling them to go off the medication and try to live a normal life on their own. And we know that doesn't typically work. If it did work, he wouldn't have been in a mental institution to begin with. But really, it's disturbing. And I don't mean to judge his mother. I'm sure she wanted to believe that her son was fine and that he could live on his own and have a successful life. But, particularly in this case, she was wrong. He initially shared the apartment with roommates before all of them moved out, and he was left to live on his own. Later investigation uncovered that in mid-1977, Chase was stopped and arrested on a reservation in the Pyramid Lake, Nevada area. His body was smeared with blood, and a bucket of blood was found in his truck. The blood was determined to be cow's blood, and no charges were filed. Again, I think that's a failure of the judicial system. At that point, that's disturbing enough. I don't care what kind of blood it was, but it's disturbing enough to find someone with blood all over them and cow's blood. That should have been a criminal case because he likely killed someone's cow that obviously wasn't his. That should have been criminal, and charges should have been filed. There's the second failure of systems on this person. On December 29th of 77, this is the first reported known victim of Chase, and it was in a drive-by shooting, which is a very impersonal way to kill someone. We typically will see serial killers do strangulation with ligatures or with their hands. We will see using knives and stabbing people, very upfront, personal. But in this case, it was a drive-by shooting, and the victim was Ambrose Griffin, a 51-year-old engineer and father of two. So just a horrible, horrible circumstance, and not an event that you would actually tie to a serial killer. Drive-by shooting is not their typical MO. 2 weeks later, he attempted to enter the home of a woman, but because her doors were locked, he walked away. Chase later told detectives that he took locked doors as a sign that he was not welcome, but unlocked doors were an invitation to come inside. This is also a very common thought of serial killers. Many of them are opportunist killers, and if they have an opportunity to kill, if all things line up, then they do it. And in this case, if those doors had been opened, those would have been victims, or at least he would have attempted to do whatever he wanted to do at that time to them. So, not being funny when I say this, but that's a fantastic argument to keeping your doors locked at all times. Sometimes that drives me crazy because I'm just one of these people that I want to come and go on my front porch. I want to come and go I just don't want to think about having to unlock the door every time I want to go in and out. My mother always locks the door everywhere. Every door in the house is always locked, no matter what time of day it is. And I understand that. I do understand that now, but again, it's it's the smart thing to do. It's kind of like in that same category as never hitchhiking or never picking up a hitchhiker. You don't see a lot of hitchhikers anymore, but the ones that you see will typically have some sort of criminal background, and are very dangerous people. So we want to make sure. I don't joke